Hi, friends. I wanted to share something with you that the Lord has brought back to my memory recently about some prophetic storms that I encountered in 2019. So there were three prophetic storms, and as I was going through them at the time, like so many things when you're just living your life and following God, you don't necessarily understand what's happening in the moment, but hindsight can be 2020. And so in this year of 2020, and a year where we're all praying for clarity and 2020 vision, if you will, especially in these times. I wanted to look back on what God had been showing me last year and offer some words of hope and encouragement to you guys. So last year I experienced, as I said, 3 prophetic storms, and it's a lot of information, and so the best way for me to convey all of it to you guys is to just read from a Word document where I'm chronicling the things that God showed me last year. So the first storm that happened was on March 14th, 2019. So last year, I experienced something prophetically I didn't quite understand. My husband, Evan, and I were driving from our house on the west side of Cincinnati in Sala Park to downtown Cincinnati for a fundraiser for the local chapter of the American Kidney Foundation. We had donated art for auction towards the cause, and on the drive there, we experienced a crazy storm. I mean, this storm was epic. The rain was so heavy that we could barely see. The windshield wipers couldn't keep up with it. And then once we got to this area that's called the 6th Street Viaduct, which goes up and down a hill, we drove through a flooded area of the viaduct, and the water, as we drove down the hill, the water splashed up over the windshield of our car. And there was a good 10 or 20 seconds where Evan and I couldn't see anything at all. And it freaked me out. It shocked me. The storm was hard enough, but then this moment where we couldn't see anything just totally freaked me out. I shouted some expletives, and then I just cried out to Jesus. And that was about all I had time to do. And so then finally we get out of this thing, where we can't see, and meanwhile my husband is just keeping his hand on the wheel and just going straight, and thank God we didn't crash into anything. We were okay. And then suddenly, as we got close to entering the downtown Cincinnati area, the rain slowed down, the sun came out, and there were 2 brilliant rainbows in the sky. At first I just saw one rainbow, and it was, I'm not kidding you, I saw a lot of rainbows when my husband and I spent about a month in Scotland a few years ago. It's like the land of rainbows up there. But this was literally the brightest rainbow I've ever seen in my whole life. And then there was a second one right above it. And so I felt like prophetically there was something going on there. We're on our way to this kidney fundraiser. We go through a terrible storm. There's a moment where we can't see. We come out of the storm, and then we see these beautiful rainbows. So I got on Marco Polo on my phone, and I tried to capture the rainbow and show it to some prophetic intercessor friends of mine and say, look, I think God's speaking here. I don't know what he's saying, but he's saying something. Meanwhile, my brother, who's a musician, is on his way to a gig, and he's driving the opposite directions. He's driving northwest out to Westchester, Ohio, and he avoided the storm, but he was driving on the 275 loop that goes around the city, and he actually drove through the end of the rainbow, the place where the rainbow meets the earth. It was crazy. And he's got his little playlist on his phone playing through his car speakers, but it's on shuffle, and he's not controlling how the tracks are coming up and the order of them. And this song called Rainbows by Casey Musgrove came on his radio right as he's driving through the end of the rainbow. And he was just overcome with emotion and knew that there was something spiritual going on, and he's literally weeping as he's driving. So as I reflected back on that day, March 14th of 2019, I wondered if God was speaking prophetically to me and my brother about our dad. I was on my way to a kidney fundraiser, and it was about 6 weeks later, in the month of April, that we found out my dad had cancer in his kidney. And my dad died last year. He died on December 3rd, 2019 at 11:11 a.m. in the morning. So the fact that my husband Evan and I drove through a storm on our way to a kidney fundraiser seemed somehow connected to prophetically pointing towards the storm of dealing with my dad's sickness and his death. What I'm realizing now, though, is that this storm that we went through in the natural was both a micro prophetic moment that specifically pointed to my dad, but it was also a macro prophetic experience. And this is even reflected in my dad's name. My dad's name was Jonathan Tate Shepard, but he went by Tate. And he was diagnosed with cancer during the Hebrew year 5779. And the 9 in Hebrew, which when it's transliterated into English is spelled T-E-T. I'm not sure why it's spelled that way, because it's pronounced in a way that rhymes with mate. So it's not Tet, it's pronounced Tate. It was the year of Tate, literally. So the Lord, I believe, gave me these prophetic experiences all during the year of Tate, not just about the storm I would go through and losing my father, named Tate, but he was pointing prophetically to the storm that we're all in right now. Yeah, and I have more to say about that. So storm number 2, so that was storm number 1, March 14th, 2019. Storm number 2 was in July. This came in the form of a dream. So in July, I had a really significant dream. A lot unfolded after I had this dream that I don't feel at liberty to share at this point. I don't feel that God has released me to share what happened as a result of this dream. But I do feel like he has released me to share at least a part of it. And that's what I'm going to read to you today. So July 2019, I had a very significant dream. There's more to the dream that unfolded that had to do with the founding of our nation, First Nations, Native American peoples, slavery, the 400-year anniversary of slavery, and the Civil War, and how it's all tied to even abortion. This dream, what I am seeing now, it was an invitation to a prayer journey where God led me to deal with repenting over the spiritual taproots of how all of these things have affected our nation. And again, he has not released me to share the details of everything yet, but he has released me to share part of what I experienced last year as it relates to this dream. So back to the dream. My husband Evan and I were on a road trip. We arrived at what felt like a very large state park. We walked through a wooded, forested area. We were on a wooden boardwalk. We walked through kind of a marshy area. And then we walked to an area where like the trees and all the shrubs and stuff like opened up into like sand dunes and a beach. And there were a bunch of people there. And I asked Evan, where are we and what kind of a place would have geography like this? I said, are we in North Carolina? Because I'm thinking forests, there's coastal, parts of North Carolina. So I didn't know. And then I hear this woman shout, "You're in Virginia." And I was like, okay. So it was getting close to dusk. And I looked out in front of me to the ocean. And I saw this huge storm coming. Big, black storm. Very large. but it was far away and I wasn't afraid of it. But I was intrigued by it, and I sensed the Lord inviting me to step out and get a closer look at it. So I walked close to the water's edge and just looked at it, and I noticed that it was coming from the east. So I woke up from the dream. I wondered what God was saying. And then I did a Google image search, and I thought, okay, I thought I was in North Carolina. Somebody said I was in Virginia. I'll just Google beaches in Virginia near North Carolina. So what I found next, I was just totally stunned by, because in my Google image search, I saw this photograph, I kid you not, of a boardwalk going through like this area of dunes, sand dunes, green vegetation, view of the ocean, that looked exactly like my dream. I mean, just dead on. And when I clicked on the website, there were other photographs of forests and marshes that looked exactly like my dream. So I knew God was speaking to me about something. It was way too specific. And the website was called First Landing State Park. So I look it up on the map, I figure out where it is. It's near Virginia Beach. And I'm thinking, okay, God, are you saying that we need to go to First Landing State Park? It sounds like a fun vacation. What I had no idea about at the time was that he was actually leading me on a prayer journey. So as I started looking more into the history of First Landing State Park, I discovered that it was named that because it's the place where the first English colonialists landed. This is before the Mayflower. This is John Smith, Pocahontas, and the whole Virginia Company who came over to the United States looking for gold. But their actual spiritual mandate was to come to what we know as America today and to spread the gospel. And there was a man on board this ship, very godly man named Reverend Robert Hunt, and he was the glue of this whole ragtag crew called the Virginia Company. He kept peace among the guys. They endured a crazy storm on the way over, almost didn't make it, and he really held things together by keeping the peace. Well, after he died, everything just sort of became unraveled with the Virginia Company and the relations that they had with the Native Americans they encountered, suffered, and it just was a very rocky start to the founding of America as we know it. So meanwhile, this summer, actually leading up to the dream and after the dream, God just kept bringing these numbers 411 to my attention. Like I would look at the clock at that time, just all kinds of things, like things I couldn't make up. It just was like every day he was bombarding me with something that had to do with 411, and I didn't know why. And as I started looking into Robert Hunt a little bit more, I discovered that the month that I had the dream in July, that was the month that they had historical documented records of the death of Robert Hunt. It was in July, and it was actually 411 years ago. So I was like, all right, Lord, clearly the death of the 411th anniversary of the death of Robert Hunt is important to you. What are you saying? And so I just continued to dig in, and just kind of stunned at how specific God was being. And then what unfolded afterwards was this incredible prayer journey where God led me to discover via my father looking in through his ancestors that I had all these ancestors through the Tate line. My dad, Tate Shepard, was named after relatives in his family who had the last name Tate, and it started with this man Magnus Tate, who came over from the Orkney Islands in Scotland, and all of his descendants were part of like some of the early forms of government in Virginia. So God led me down this amazing prophetic prayer journey where I was discovering how my ancestors had roots with literally with some of the earliest forms of government that had to do with the founding of our nation. And just discovering other things, like my on my great grandmother's side, her name was Grace Bartlett. She was related to Josiah Bartlett, who signed the Declaration of Independence, and was one of the signers. And so God was just showing me some extraordinary things about my ancestors, and what unfolded next was him leading me on a prayer journey to the land where my ancestors lived and where they governed. And at the end, it led to First Landing State Park, where Robert Hunt first landed with the Virginia Company. And when he landed, he placed a cross in the sand, and he dedicated our nation to the spreading of the gospel. So the part that I know that I need to share with you guys has to do with what the Lord led me to do at the site where Robert Hunt placed this cross and dedicated the United States. It wasn't called the United States back then, but dedicated our country, this land, to Jesus Christ. So through a series of revelations of God leading me to specific scriptures in the middle of the night, like literally waking me up in the middle of the night, like giving me page numbers, chapter, verse, all kinds of just crazy stuff that I wasn't looking for, but it's like God just got a hold of me and showed me this stuff. He was giving me the name Gilead, and I'm like, Lord, I don't understand how Gilead relates to any of this and why you're talking to me about this. And so I sensed that it was an invitation to look into where that name came from, Gilead. So he led me down this kind of rabbit hole where I discovered that the actual roots of the name Gilead go all the way back to the story of Jacob and Laban in the Bible, where they've had conflict with one another, but Jacob just kind of wants to get away from the conflict, and he wants to set up a covenant of peace. So what he ends up doing is building a heap of stones called a Gilead. It's a witness heap, and it's to form this covenant of peace with his father-in-law Laban. And I believe it's the first mention of a Gilead in the Bible, and it's this idea that it's a marker and it's a sign and a witness physically to peace and to covenant. And so what God was speaking to me was that I needed to go to First Landing, where Robert Hunt first landed with the Virginia Company, the very beginning of the start of our nation, and go to as close as I could to the place where Robert Hunt put the cross in the sand, dedicated this country to Jesus. And I needed to pray and build, if you will, a spiritual Gilead in this site, a witness heap of stones. And I was to, with my prayers, ignite this area as an altar of prayer to God, and ask his mighty angels to guard these same shores that were at the founding of our nation. And this is where I saw the storm coming. So I just was like, okay, Lord, I'll obey you, and I'll do what you want me to do. The second thing that I knew I was to do was to take communion there. And I was to decree and breathe life again into the words of Robert Hunt, that from these very shores, the gospel will go forth to not only this new world, but the entire world. And in a lot of ways, these were words that were God's original intentions for America. In some ways, these words have been fulfilled, because the gospel has spread throughout the United States of America. And from these shores of the United States of America, through missionaries, the gospel has gone forth into some of the farthest regions of the world. So in a lot of ways, the words of Robert Hunt have been fulfilled. But in other ways, there is still much work to be done to awaken the church, to spread the gospel, and to prepare for a great end time harvest and bring Jesus to the nations. So when my husband Evan and I made this journey out to First Landing, we didn't know what First Landing was going to be like. All I was going on were the photos that I saw from the state park website. So we get there, And we are following the GPS, and we drive to where Robert Hunt first placed this cross, and where there's like a memorial. And when we get there, we get to the entrance. I was shocked to find out that we actually couldn't enter because it was about to close. And I'm thinking, it's pretty early. It's not even like 4 o'clock, but it was about to close at 4 o'clock. And the soldier who greeted us was very polite, but he said, this is a military base. It's Fort Story. And you can come back, but you need to know no concealed carry firearms, no book bags, no contraband, no alcohol. We're going to keep your license. You're going to have to leave your car by the entrance. We're going to check your, everything you have on you. And then you're going to get on a bus, and then you can go look at the oldest lighthouse in the world, and you can go see where Robert Hunt placed the cross. And so I was like, wow, okay, interesting. I had no idea about any of that. And when you look at if you research Fort Story, and I believe it's like just military.com. When you look at the website, it's interesting the way that they describe Fort Story. It's at Cape Henry, and it's inside First Landing State Park, but it's sort of quarantined, if you will, to just be this military base. And so I'll just read you a little description of Fort Story. Fort Story is the Army's only training facility for logistics over-the-shore operations, to train troops on amphibious equipment, and to practice the transfer of military cargo from ship to shore. Fort Story offers the unique combination of features including dunes, beaches, sand, surf, deep water anchorage, variable tide conditions, maritime forest, and open land. So this is just like my dream, just like the land and the diverse geography that I saw in my dream. I'll go on reading. These unique coastal natural resource features offer unique training opportunities to a variety of military units from all services. So all services means, and I found this out when we got there from some of our guides, that all branches of the military come to this place. So you've got the Army, you've got the Navy, you've got the Marines, you've got the Coast Guard, and you've got the Air Force. And I'm thinking about this, and I'm like, 5 branches of the military. And then I remembered something that my friend Katie shared with me about how she saw the branches of the military as like the 5-fold ministry. So you've got the Army, and she sees the Army as like the apostles. You've got the Navy, and she sees the Navy as like the prophets. So you've got the Army, the apostles. They kind of do everything. Like apostles have to kind of they have to do everything, in a lot of ways. And they're a lot of times the first on the ground. And so the Army, the apostles, the Navy are like the prophets. Like you've got the Navy SEALs who are just kind of like intense and do covert missions, and you have to be able to see far distances when it comes to being in the Navy and navigating a ship, and that's like the prophetic. And then she was like, the Marines are like the evangelists. Like they're just sort of like, they're crazy, they're willing to do anything, they're totally adventurous. And then the Coast Guard, they come in and rescue, and that is like pastors who shepherd their people. And then she said in the Air Force, it's like they're always training, they're always having to take tests, they're always having to like be really accurate with their instruments, and that's like the teachers. So I'm like, this is kind of interesting, Lord. You're leading me to a place where all of the military meets, and it just so happens to be where our nation first started. And you're wanting me to set up a spiritual Galid, this altar of prayer, and you're wanting me to decree the words of Robert Hunt again and breathe life to them again. Okay, I'm on board, but how am I going to get in there with, he was saying you need to go in there and take communion and then pour out the communion elements and oil over the land. And I'm like, how am I going to get all this in there when I can't take a book bag in there? They're going to search my purse, like, okay, we'll see. So we get there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? They're going to search us, and the soldier opens my purse, and I have a small bottle of olive oil in there. I have some matzo crackers for communion, and I had a small bottle of grape juice in there for communion. And it's like the soldier didn't even see it, and I got in with it fine, no big deal. So we got in, and again, I felt in my heart that the fact that all 5 branches of the military are met at this place, and the parallel with that my friend Katie saw with the fivefold ministry, the words of Robert Hunt decreeing over the land, I was like, there is some kind of spiritual strategy here, Lord. I don't understand it, but I do sense you truly calling me as a Christian to function as what is what 1 Peter 2:9 says, that we are a royal priesthood, and we are here as boots on the ground at First Landing in this historic and strategic land to intercede for our country as priests and to make decrees as kings for God's will to be done and his kingdom to come on earth as it is in heaven. So we get there, and I'm wondering, I'm thinking about Jacob and Laban, I'm thinking about the stones, and I'm like, how in the world am I going to build an altar of stones? I obviously couldn't take any with me. Where am I going to find rocks to build a galid, And I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. So we climb the lighthouse, the oldest lighthouse in the world, in the country. And we get to the top, we look out the windows, and I just was totally stunned because you could see the shores. All along the shores are piles of huge stones. And I think that probably the military had them there to like build beachheads or something to do these military drills. But I didn't know that. And I didn't have to build a gully. I didn't have to build witness heaps of stones, because literally the entire shore from the view of the White House near where Robert Hunt placed his cross, it's filled with heaps of stones, heaps of these boulders. And I was like, wow. And I just wept because I couldn't, for one, part of me like couldn't believe that I was actually hearing the Lord accurately, about this whole witness heap of stones, that I wasn't crazy, that he was saying, I want you to pray over this galid. But he had already done the work in a sense, that they were already there. And I just was in awe of the sweetness of God in that moment, that he would speak that to me, and that I would hear it clear enough to be able to at least take a step of faith to show up. So we go down to where Robert Hunt has placed the cross, my husband and I just went down there, to pray and take communion, and to speak the words of Robert Hunt again. And as soon as we arrived, we walked, we took our time at the lighthouse. We walked, it's a little bit of a stroll from the lighthouse to where the cross is. And so we walked down to where the cross was, and my husband looks at the time, and it was 11:11. And I'm just like, you can't make this up, man. This is just, I couldn't have made that up if I tried. We showed up at Robert Hunt's memorial at 11:11. And, I had no idea, this was in October. I had no idea that 2 months later, that my father would die at 11:11 on December 3rd. And I know, I'm not a numbers person. I failed remedial math in college, but I know that God speaks in numbers, and I know that he cares about anniversaries. So that's something that I've just been learning to pay attention to in my walk with him, is that he speaks in numbers, and anniversaries matter very much to him. So we walked down to the shores of First Landing. We walked down to the heaps of stones. I poured out all the communion elements in the oil, and I prayed that God would protect these shores of America. And I dedicated that land of First Landing and these witness heaps, these galids, as spiritual galids, as prayer altars to the Lord, a witness heap of peace over the United States, and a portal where angels could freely come and go to protect our nation and to carry out God's sovereign plans for our country. So fast forward, today's March 23rd. On March 21st, 2020, my friend Bethany shared a photo with me that our friend Michael had sent her. And it was of a license plate that said 412 years. It will be 412 years that Reverend Robert Hunt died. It will be 412 years that Reverend Robert Hunt declared that from these very shores, the gospel would spread, not just in this land, but throughout the entire world. And so I believe that God showed that license plate of 412 years to my friend Michael, that Bethany knew she had to share it with me as a confirmation from God, that the storm that I saw during the 411th anniversary last July, the 411th anniversary of Robert Hunt's death, the storm that I saw coming for our nation, coming from the east, is upon us. It's here. It's here right now. And in this storm, and this time of darkness and uncertainty because of the coronavirus and its effect on our national economy, its effect on our global economies, this is a time that is ripe for the words of Robert Hunt to come alive like never before. I believe it is a time for the church to awaken, to shine brightly in the dark, and to see the gospel spread in a world that sorely needs Jesus more than ever. People are scared. People have lost their jobs. They need to hear a word of hope, and they need to know that our God never leaves us or forsakes us. So as I look back on the dream that I had in July of 2019, as well as the experience I had with my husband driving through the storm where we couldn't see, driving in the rain last March, I can see now that both of these storms that I experienced in the dream and in the natural were pointing to what our country is going through right now. What I saw in my dream at First Landing was a storm coming from the east. The storm came from the east that we're enduring. It came from China. I knew it was a serious storm, but I was not afraid. And the storm that Evan and I experienced driving to the kidney fundraiser on March 14th, 2019, because of this being a leap year and us having an extra day, it's exactly a year to the date of Trump announcing a national state of emergency on March 13th, 2020. So March 14th, we drive through the storm, 2019. March 13th this year, because of February 29th, adding an extra day, it's exactly 1 year to the date of Trump announcing that we are in a national state of emergency. So the storm that my husband and I were in was really scary at the moment. We couldn't see the road in front of us. And we didn't know if we were going to crash. We didn't know what was going to happen. I cried out to Jesus. But the storm didn't last long. And afterwards, we saw two beautiful rainbows. So when I consider all of this, these two storms, I think there's a few ways that we could look at it. I know that God prophetically was pointing to what we're going through right now. So number one, we could see this as pointing to the end times, because Jesus says that the end times will be like the days of Noah. And it was after the rain stopped that God put the rainbow in the sky as a promise to never destroy the earth by flood again. So you could see the rainbows maybe that I saw after the storm as a sign of being like the days of Noah. But Jesus said in the end times that it's similar to the days of Noah in the sense that people will be oblivious. Noah's building the ark and preparing for the flood, and people are just kind of doing their thing, doing life, and they all think Noah's crazy, and they're oblivious to what's coming. Interestingly enough, those pages in my Bible are on page 1111, and I'll show you an image of that where Jesus is saying that it will be like the days of Noah. There are many right now who see all of these world events as pointing towards the return of Christ. But Jesus said no one knows when the Son of Man will return. Only the Father knows. That being said, I do think that there will be signs that begin to point to his return. Secondly, another way to look at it is that you could see the rainbows after the storm as a sign of peace and rest, a new start for our nation. Just like after the flood, the earth experienced a fresh start. With the flood, it was almost like the whole planet had been cleansed or spiritually baptized or immersed in water. It was like somebody going into a mikveh bath to be spiritually and ceremonially cleansed. So it's like the whole world was mikvahed. With the economic storm that we're in right now, and right now because of the coronavirus, the stage is set. It's the perfect storm, if you will, for a possible economic reset after an economic collapse. Some people think that this could lead to what is known as Nasara or Jasara, which would be like all the world debt being wiped out. It would be like a debt jubilee. Some people believe that this could lead to the dismantling of the Federal Reserve and that our currency would then be backed again by precious metals and gold, and no longer be a fiat currency. To do that could lead to greater justice and less corruption in our economic system. Some people believe that we may enter into a time of darkness, and just like the storm that my husband and I endured where we couldn't see, we may actually experience some kind of a blackout where we lose contact with social media. And that the reason for that is that during this perfect storm, Trump and others are using this as an opportunity, because of all of the travel restrictions, to round up those in Hollywood, those in the political arena who have been in corrupt practices, including pedophilia and other things. You can look into that stuff. I don't feel I need to elaborate any more on that. Third way to look at it is this. A friend of mine posted something on Facebook the other day that she was concerned for her friends and her coworkers right now because they were out of work because of the coronavirus. But she said something interesting that I believe relates to the storm we're in and the storm that I endured on a personal level last year with losing my father. We will come out stronger, but it is difficult to see in the moment. That's what she said. So just like it was difficult for me and my husband to see in the moment, and we didn't know what was going to happen, we don't know what's going to happen right now. It's difficult to see that. We don't know for sure. But I believe that once we come through this storm, we will come out stronger. The period where my husband and I couldn't see was scary, but it was brief. And when we came through it, we saw 2 rainbows that were absolutely beautiful. So we're experiencing something now that's unprecedented. Right now, I have a friend whose father is in critical condition, and because of the coronavirus, she can't even see her father. There are restrictions where people can't visit their family in nursing homes. So these are unprecedented times, and we've never experienced anything like this before. The reaction to the coronavirus is in some ways over the top. I mean, to not be able to see your own father when he's in critical condition is really serious and maybe an overreaction. In other ways, maybe our reaction to the coronavirus is not serious enough. Our economy may go into a serious recession or economic depression, or it might bounce back quickly. But regardless, it may change at a fundamental level. No one knows what's really going to happen. What I do know is that there were 2 rainbows at the end of the physical storm that I went through last March, 1 year to the date that Trump announced that we're in a national state of emergency. And I believe that this financial and health storm that we're in right now could be the same. 2 rainbows point to a double portion of God's goodness. What this looks like right now is yet to be seen. The important part is to seek God's face. Seek God's face above seeking his hands. We want answers, we want control, and so a lot of times we want to seek like the prophetic bells and whistles, the signs, the wonders, all of that. But seek his face. This is a time to seek his face, seek his character above seeking the bells and whistles. Seek intimacy with the Lord. Get right with the Lord. Get your priorities in line. Seek his kingdom first. It is time to pray the words of David in Psalm 51. These are the words my father prayed just a few weeks before he died, when he was really trying to set his affairs in order spiritually. David said, and this was what my dad prayed, "Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew in me a steadfast spirit." So that, I believe, is to be our primary goal right now, is to pray and seek the Lord for a pure heart and a steadfast spirit, and to walk in faith and not by sight. I'm going to close with just speaking briefly about the 3rd storm that I encountered last year during the year of Tate. So last summer I had an art show, and in preparation for it, I felt a stirring to do a painting of Jesus asleep in the storm, in the boat, with the clouds beginning to clear and a double rainbow in the sky. It was an image that I had had on my mind for years. But for some reason that summer, I knew I had to make that painting, and it had to be in this art show that I was doing last summer. Looking back, I am so glad that I obeyed that unction that I had, because I know it was God. I'm really glad that I finished that painting in time, because a friend of mine and an art patron was in town with his wife. His wife was dying of stage 4 cancer. And while they were here, this friend of mine went to go see this art show, and he was really moved by this painting. It's called "Be Still," of Jesus asleep during the storm. My friend was in the middle of the worst storm of his life. He was facing the possibility of losing his wife. And so many people were praying for a miracle. She was an amazing, godly woman, and you just wonder sometimes, like, why God takes certain people home. There's some questions I don't know that we can have the answer to on this side of heaven. We were all praying for a miracle. I went to the hospital and prayed with him and the family, and just asked God for a miracle. But ultimately, we have to just trust him and just say, your will be done, Lord. And God did take her home, so she passed. But before my friend left Cincinnati and was going back home to where he lives in California, he knew he had to have that painting, so he bought it. And since then, God has just revealed so much to him about storms. I mean, it's just over the top, the ways that God has been speaking to him very specifically about storms. And he said, we all just want the rainbows. None of us wants the storm. But life is both. Life is both the storm and the sun and the rainbows. You need both. You need both for things to grow. And I will say that from what I can witness remotely, from my friend and what he shares in social media, his intimacy with God has just skyrocketed throughout this storm. And that's what is really important in the end. And the prophetic gifting on his life, his capacity to hear from the Lord and God speaking to him and drawing near to him is just catapulted. And he has set his face like a flint towards Jesus, and he's encountered the faithfulness of God in the midst of this terrible storm. I could say so much about my own storm of going through my dad's illness this last year and losing him in December. It rocked my family in so many ways. It was probably the hardest year of my life, and I'm still in the midst of intense grief. I'm still in the midst of my own storm of grief of losing my father. But there's something about storms. There's something about storms that changes us. Storms humble you. Storms make you more compassionate if you let it. Storms strengthen your resolve. And even trees need storms and the right amount of wind resistance in order to stand strong. These are hard times, but they're exciting times to be alive. And as believers in Jesus, it is time for us to shine as lights of hope in the darkness. We need to be wise. We need to wash our hands. We need to prepare for an economic downturn, possibly, just the way that Joseph prepared Pharaoh in Genesis 41. And we may enter into a time of darkness where we don't really know what's coming, or even a social media blackout or an internet blackout. I don't know. We may not be able to see the road ahead, just like my husband and I couldn't see the road ahead last March. And the storm may look scary, but I do believe it will pass, just like that storm that my husband and I drove through. And it will lead to something better. Whether that something better is the return of our Lord Jesus, or a time of debt jubilee, or justice and a lot of crooked people getting arrested and draining the swamp, only God knows. But I do believe that the rainbows after the storm that I encountered last March, the rainbows in my painting, these are signs of hope that do point to a fresh start. And so I'll close with a scripture that God gave me last year, even as my father was so close to death and times were very, very hard. Isaiah 43:19. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it and know it? And will you not give heed to it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. I pray that this is a time that we will all draw near to God Most High, the great waymaker who makes a way in the wilderness. And that as he leads, we will blaze new trails. God bless you. The Lord bless you and keep you. And just remember that he has not given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of love, power, and a sound mind. And he works out all things for the good for those who are in Christ Jesus. Amen.